Okay, I think we'll make a start now. Most people I think have joined. Welcome to Outdoors for All, Building a Legacy for Inclusion and Diversity, the second day. We're delighted you've decided to join us for our first virtual conference. We think we have nearly 250 people from across the UK, Ireland and even internationally joining us, and this may be our biggest outdoor recreation network conference ever. We believe that now is the time to make positive changes and modernise the outdoor recreation sector, enabling organisations to better connect a wider range of people with nature. The importance of green and blue spaces to health and well-being has never been so apparent and is higher up the agenda than ever before. However, we know the benefits of being active in the outdoors are not enjoyed equally by all. This conference seeks to be the first step in the Outdoor Recreation Network, providing a focus to connect more people to nature, including underrepresented groups, so that we can all reap the benefits. We're going to explore how we can get people moving more often, which groups are missing, and particularly today, what are the barriers to certain demographic groups and how we can meaningfully engage with those groups, and what steps the Outdoor Recreation Network should take and the sector. So this conference will shape our Outdoor Recreation Network's direction and future work on making the outdoors more inclusive and diverse. What I'd like to talk to you about next is how to engage during the event. If you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video camera because we're recording the whole event. We'd like you to engage as much as possible. And already you're busy on the chat, which is great. And that's one of the advantages of online conferences, is when you're listening to speakers or watching videos, you can respond to them instantly in the chat. And that would be great to see what your reactions are, because we record the chat, and even if we can't respond to your questions right now, we can take them away and think about them later. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat pane. And please turn on your speaker when you want to speak, because normally you're muted. And if you want to be seen, you'll have to turn your video camera on. If you could turn your video camera off during presentations and videos, that would be really helpful, because it will save bandwidth and make everything run more smoothly. So today, what's the programme? Well, yesterday we did wellness and the outdoors and had a look at who is missing from the outdoors. And today we're going to have a look at steps to address inequality and the lack of diversity in the outdoors. So things that have been done and which maybe you could do in your jobs and your roles to improve equality in the outdoors. Our first session today is going to have a look at nature engagement during COVID-19. That's going to be run until 10:35. Then we'll move on to some videos until 11. And at the end of each one, there may be an opportunity to ask questions. 11 o'clock's the time to stretch your legs, grab a bite to eat and maybe a drink, because at 11:15 we're going to go back into some examples again of diversity and inclusion. 12 o'clock's the chance for you to have your say and participate in the breakout rooms and discuss certain topics. And then 12:45 you get to vote for your competition winner. So we've had lots of good pictures and we'll be voting for them at 12:45, leading into the plenary at 12:50, and we'll finish at 1:15. At that point, we'd really like you to fill in the feedback surveys, because we want to learn from this conference just as much as you do, and you will be able to help shape Outdoor Recreation Network's work into the future. So I'm just going to check to see if we've got Kay Lewis Jones on the call, because Kay wanted to say a few things.
Hi, yes, I have managed to get here, and it's great to join you all.
Yes, can I just introduce Kay? Kay's working on inclusion for DEFRA, and so she'd just like to introduce the work they're doing and say a few words. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you, Pippa. So I work at DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, in the Nature and People team, which is working on kind of supporting people's connection with the environment. And my specific role is around diversity, inclusion and communities. And I am working particularly at the moment on the response to the Glover Review, which was a review of the national landscapes. And we are really, really pleased to be able to join the conference. My colleague Michelle Luscombe is also joining, and yesterday was fantastic, and it will be great to join the session today, and it will really help inform our policy work. So I just wanted to say thank you all for joining, and it's great to be here.
Thanks, Kay. Great. Well, it's nice for some of us to know that DEF are on the call, and so they're taking notice of all your contributions. So I'd like to move on to the first session, which is nature engagement during COVID-19, understanding different experiences. We're joined today by two professors, Birgitta Gatersleben and Professor Caroline Scarles. Birgitta is Professor of Environmental Psychology at the University of Surrey. She studies the people-environment interactions and the impact this has on the way people feel, think and act. Birgitta's got a particular interest in people's relationship with the natural environment and the link between environmental sustainability and human well-being. Caroline is Professor of Technology and Society in the School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. Her key research interests lie in the key areas of the visual and multisensuality within society and social and cultural sustainability, and then how these are brought together through technology for social good. Caroline's recent research, which I think you'll find really interesting, has focused on enriching the visitor experience through augmented reality and image recognition technology in arts and heritage, and the role of immersive experiences in providing stimulating environments for healthy aging. Caroline also conducts research in the areas of sustainability through work on the social, cultural impacts of tourism on communities and pro-environmental behavioural change. I think you'll agree with me that they're more than qualified to speak to us today. So I'll hand over to Birgitta and Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pippa. I'll share my screen. It's quite interesting to hear your introduction and also all the chat in the chat box, because I'm thinking now, oh, there's so many other things we could talk about. Unfortunately, we haven't got enough time to tell us all we do. So can people see my screen?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so because we can't talk about everything, we're going to just talk about one project that we're doing at the moment. So Caroline and I are working on this project that's funded by the SRC, which is looking at people and nature in a pandemic. So it's basically studying how people engage with nature and how that affects their well-being pre, during and COVID-19. And we have a lovely group of people. You can see all their names here that we are working with. I should say before I started, the project is really still at the start, so we're still analysing the data, and there's probably a lot more to say, so maybe we can come back next year and tell you more. So the project's an 18-month project, and we're working with Natural England, and the overarching aim is, as I said, to understand changes in nature engagement and to help support the government green recovery strategy. And obviously the rationale behind it is that we know that engaging with nature is good for people. Well, you all know that. I don't have to tell anyone on this conference this already. And of course, what we wanted to find out what happens is when a country is in a pandemic, when we are in lockdown, when we can't go and visit the places that we usually visit. Do we visit different places? How does it affect our well-being, and how does it change over time? So we are restricted, our access is restricted, we spend more time at home. How does it have an effect on us? Now, 4 studies in this project. We'll just talk about the 2 that are highlighted here. So I'll talk a little bit more about our representative survey, large-scale survey, UK survey, And Caroline will talk a bit more about the qualitative research that we're doing. But we've also done various other studies. So there's also a pilot survey. We're surveying people after every lockdown. We've also done an analysis of people's responses to nature videos like Chris Packham and the BBC Springwatch series. And we're also going to do some secondary data analysis of Natural England data, but we won't talk about those at the moment. So my questions for today, we have a lot of data to talk about, and I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about people's sense of getting away and their need to get away. So we're all locked down. How has that affected our willingness or our need to get away and our perceived ability to get away? And how does that then relate to our well-being? And I'll specifically look at gender differences in this, because obviously this is quite relevant for this week. So why being away? Well, we know from environmental psychology theory that one of the reasons why visiting natural places has a positive effect on our well-being, health and well-being, is because visiting those places provides us with a sense of being away. So for instance, the attention restoration theory, which is one of the most often cited theories in this area, suggests that there are 4 features to restorative environments, and which you can see here: soft fascination, extent, compatibility, and being away. And this idea, the sense of being away, is really important. And there's also a lot of other research in environmental psychology and theories in environmental psychology that point to the need, the feeling that you can get away, for instance, to regulate your privacy, to get away from other people, to be with other people when you want to be and want to get away. But also favourite places theory has demonstrated that the importance of having a place to get away for emotional and cognitive self-regulation is really important for your well-being. And of course, during lockdown, this sort of feeling of being able to get away has been severely altered. So our longitudinal survey was, as we recruited, well, we're doing the survey, we did the survey in October 2020. We're going to do it again, exactly the same survey in October 21 to see how people's perceptions might have changed. Hopefully, this will be after the whole pandemic and lockdown situation, but obviously we never know. Our initial ideas of the project was to do pre, during and post lockdown, but obviously this is continuously changing. We have 850 people in the sample, and we asked them a whole range of questions, including where their perceived need to get away, perceived ability to get away, where they go to get away, and how they experience those places when they are there. So in terms of where people people's need and ability to get away, what we can see here is that this was on a 5-point scale. So you can see it's all sort of 2.5 or higher. People were most likely to say that they wanted to get away from the boredom and tediousness of everyday life, less so from other people, and also less so from demands and stresses of everyday life. What you can also see is that there's a big discrepancy for demands and particularly for boredom, between people's perceptions of the need to get away and their perceptions of the ability to get away. So boredom and tediousness of everyday life was the key thing. That was sort of a problem, if you like. So we looked at demographic differences as well. So perhaps not surprising, some of these things. Having children results in a greater need to get away and less perceived ability to get away. We did not find any effects on income at all. We found that older people have a less need and perceive more ability to get away than younger people. But the differences that really stood out were gender differences. So women overall find it more difficult to get away. But they don't differ from men in their perceived needs to get away. And those differences, the gender differences, were particularly strong for age, working status, and where they lived. So women in urban areas were more likely to feel less able to get away than men in urban areas, but there was no difference for rural areas. There was no difference between men and women who work, but there was a big difference between men and women who don't work. And there was also a big difference with age. So you can see, for instance, on the top right here, that younger women were much less likely to feel able to get away than younger men, whereas for older people, there was no difference at all. Interestingly, the gender differences were independent of whether people had children or not. So there was no interaction with having children or not, which I thought was very surprising. So where do people go to get away? Well, this is still something that we're analysing because it was an open-ended question with 850 responses. You can imagine there's a huge amount of data. But so we didn't ask specifically about whether people went to nature, but actually the vast majority of people did say that they would go into a natural place. Very often, obviously, the garden, because, yeah, that was nearby. But also a lot of people talked about a local park. A small number of people did also say that their place to go away was a room, or their bathroom, or their bedroom, or even their bath. And we are still looking at the details. So most people stayed in their home or in their garden, just under half, and 38% travelled no more than a mile. Interestingly, also 2% of people travelled more than 10 miles to get to their place to get away, which is interesting because obviously we were in lockdown at the time. This is all about the first lockdown. And most people visited quite regularly, and visits lasted between 1 and 2 hours, but it varied quite a lot. And the majority of people, the vast majority of people visited alone, although that was not related to whether they wanted to escape from the people they lived with. We did not find any differences in gender between length, duration, or distance of places visited. We did find that women were more likely to visit their garden, or say that they would visit their garden to get away, but we did not find any differences in other types of natural places. We did find that differences between the types of activities that women did and men did when they escaped to those places. So women were more likely to actually engage with nature, whereas men were more likely to use the natural environment as a, if you like, a backdrop to do sports or play games and things like that. And this also had an effect on what predicted their experiences, the healing benefits, if you like, of experiencing those places to get away. So we looked at these experiences from 4 different perspectives. We looked at how happy, excited, relaxed people felt when they visited their place to get away, but also to what extent they experience some more transcendent feelings, so the feeling of being alive, and the feeling of you were meant to be here, and things like that. The sense of connectedness to nature, and also the perceived restorative qualities of the environment, which are the ones I mentioned before, the fascinating features of the environment and the sense of being away that you experience in that environment. And what we found was that there was a difference between men and women in the extent to which they have these sort of self-transcendent or eudaimonic experiences in the places that they visited, and also their sense of connectedness. So women more likely to say that they felt a sort of transcendent experience in the place they visited to get away, and also that they felt more connected to nature. And this might, of course, be associated with the types of things that they did there, because they were more likely to do things that actually were associated with nature. And what we also found was their sort of healing experiences in these places that they visited. So how good they felt when they were in those places were explained by those eudaimonic experiences, the sense of connectedness, the restorative features, and also the need and ability to get away. I've got one other slide here that shows you also the difference between men and women here. So basically what we found is that, if you like, the healing benefits of visiting a place to escape, or mostly a natural place, was associated with all of these factors. So the more likely you were to experience a transcendent experience, have a transcendent experience in nature or in the escape place, the more likely you were to feel this experience was to have on your emotional well-being. And this was particularly strong for women. The more likely you felt connected to nature, the more likely the visit was to have a positive effect on your well-being. And again, this was stronger for women. The restorative qualities were a bigger predictor for experiences for men. But unfortunately, what we also found was that the greater need people have to get away was actually associated with less positive experiences. So unfortunately, those who have a greater need to get away are less likely to have a positive experiences to the places that they then visit to get away. And as we saw before, the need to get away and the ability to get away differed between men and women, particularly the ability to get away. So this is something that we need to analyze in a little bit more detail. But for now, I'll summarize because I'll need to leave time for Caroline to talk. So the need to escape from monotony and tediousness of everyday life is quite high during lockdown. And women find it more difficult to get away than men do, especially when they're not working, when they live in urban areas and when they're younger. We don't quite know why yet, but we're still analysing. The places that people visit to get away are mostly natural places, the garden, but also local natural places. And the things that people do there differ between men and women. And the positive healing experiences that people have in those places are related to a whole range of factors. But for women, it's particularly the sort of the connectedness to nature and the transcendent experience, the actual place qualities themselves, and interacting with that place that have the most positive effect on these experiences. So we will analyze this further. But for now, I shall hand over to Caroline, who is going to tell you a little bit more about our qualitative project. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. So as Brigitte said, the third study that we have really is focusing on the qualitative elements and experiences of people's engagement and experiences of engaging with nature. And what we were really interested in is how relationships with nature have been affected by COVID during lockdown and during an easing of travel of restrictions as well. And if where those relationships have been affected, well, how? Why, if so, how? And what does that mean for individuals? So myself and my colleague Sarah Golding, who's also a member of the team, we've been working in this particular area. I just tried to forward my slide, Brigitte, and realised that you've got control. So could you forward into the next slide, please? Thank you. So the research itself in this particular study, as I say, we're adopting a qualitative approach, and we're conducting 30 in-depth interviews with a range of different households across England, but with a particular focus on talking with households and people who are living in areas of deprivation within England. So we've been particularly looking at recruiting respondents from a range of different areas, not just urban or rural, but a combination of the two, coastal, inland. And with the way in which we've been able to access the respondents to date have really been through identifying community centres, community groups, community gardens, and also housing associations in the 20 most deprived areas of England. One of the key things, of course, is how we encourage people and create an environment within which people feel that they're able to really express and share the experiences that they're having with nature. And in order to do that, we adopted a photo elicitation approach. Now, basically what that means, for those of you who are not familiar, is that as part of our research methods, we asked respondents to identify a set of images that are meaningful for them in terms of their relationship with nature and what makes that relationship important before lockdown, during periods of lockdown, and I'm using the plural there because of course we've had more than one period of lockdown and we are continuing to conduct our interviews now. And then also as well, the third area, which is actually images of experiences during that periods of easing of lockdown. So as I just indicated, we're still collecting the data. So these are very, very early indicative findings, but we wanted to share with you an insight to these. So next slide, please, Brigitte. So early observations from a pre-COVID experiences of engagement with nature within the sample really have seen, and echoes what Birgitta has said, is seen that, nature provides a grand setting, a backdrop, for a variety of really distinctive and purposeful activities. So people will go into nature for particular reasons, whether that be exercise. We have respondents who talk and are very actively engaged in conservation, whether that's wildlife spotting, whether that's simply a sense of, relating to that sense of being away, escapism and becoming immersed into landscapes. But of course, we all know that nature and outdoor spaces are used in a whole range of different ways. So holidaying, relaxation, socialising as well. Next slide, please, Birgitta. But then when we actually start looking at the early observations of people's experiences during lockdown, of course, we saw a complete switch to almost like the hyper-local, not just looking at the kind of the parks, etc., that are maybe on some people's doorsteps, but actually looking at nature indoors. You'll see Birgitta and many of us have plants behind us, and we have nature with and around us in many different ways. So again, it's really important to recognise that we did not define nature. We did not impose a definition of what we understood nature to be, but rather part of this project is very much exploring the different ways in which nature is manifest and becomes meaningful to individuals at different places and at different points in time. So we've had people talk about houseplants and window boxes right through to people who have got more open wild spaces on their doorstep. So really looking at that all-inclusive and all-embracing understanding of what nature means to people. Now, within this kind of elevation of the local, that local, the positive aspects really emphasise the notion of exploration, almost a sense of micro exploration and micro adventure. That real delight, enjoyment, fun, spending that time looking at, almost in a sense, the metaphor of a microscope, really getting to know the intricacies of nature on our doorsteps. But really interesting as well, people really are sharing the ways in which such engagements with nature facilitate the ability to spend quality time with people. Now, of course, we are still living in context of social distancing and we're in lockdown at this point in time, but where people talk about that is spending quality time with those that they are living with or that they are in a support bubble with, which again shows that greater intricacy and that greater insight into the detail of both relationships with nature, but how nature facilitates deeper relationships with the people around us. One of the things, of course, is the development of negative aspects of exploring in lockdown. So where people were out for their permitted exercise within the limits and boundaries of lockdown as outlined, what we saw was there was an element there of boredom, but really interestingly, that sense of fear and fearfulness of being in nature, not necessarily of nature itself, but actually of the social relationships and the interactions with others that would take place within these spaces. So again, some of these are very much perceived by our respondents as being, they wonder what other people are thinking of them and why they're in that space and how they're acting in that space. So again, that fearfulness coming through in terms of these wider kind of societal interactions within natural environments. Elements of frustration, of course, frustration at not being able to get out, not being able to go places. I'm sure we can all kind of relate to that and empathise with that. But again, that kind of coming back to that fearfulness is the negative aspects of that sense of being in crowds. Now, of course, there were very, very few places where we experienced crowding, as it were, but actually, again, recognising that people are becoming more adjusted and more familiar with having distance, actually recognising where people are going to some places that there is a relative crowding just because of higher volumes of people being there than they would otherwise be used to. Therefore, we're hearing a lot about people imposing self-imposed restrictions, even though within government guidelines they are able to go out, they are able to take that walk or whatever it may be, but they themselves decide not to do that. So again, that real interesting dichotomy between what one is permitted to do and then what one is actually permitting oneself to do. In terms of kind of like leisure, recreation, travel, the easing of restrictions and how we engage with nature appears at this point only to have had a small impact. There is, of course, that sense of freedom, there is that sense of release, but mostly still local, mostly, as we know, confined to these kind of hyper-local spaces. Where we see that easing of restrictions, particularly coming out of lockdowns, there's an element of relief you know, being able to not just go into these natural environments on one's own, but being able to do that with people who are from other households as and when is permitted. So next slide, please, Brigitte. So just to share a couple of examples as to how people's behaviour has changed over time. This particular gentleman really spoke about, you know, going overseas, experiencing these grand wilderness landscapes, national parks and iconic wildlife in a whole range of different ways. But actually what was a real highlight for him and his family, he's got very young children, was that sense of micro-adventure and micro-discovery and discovering wildlife in the back garden, in the local area. And of course, private gardens, as we know, and access to local parks became absolutely key. Again, in this particular case, it was interesting because the gentleman shared that, you know, he's actually very aware that when things open up again and when we have this full easing of restriction, whether that's the 21st of June or not, but where we have this return to normal, still uncomfortable using that phrase, but where we have that, how can they find space to retain these connections with nature, these natural engagements that they're having, when all the other busyness and all the other hectic commitments of life come back into play? So again, that reconciliation of this newfound engagement and connection, and how we continue to make space for that going forward. Again, combine that with, well, when we can move again, we're not going to be just looking at nature on our back door, but actually we are going to be going wider and further afield to get more wildlife encounters. So next slide, please, Brigitte. This example here is illustrative of that sense of fearfulness. So this was a gentleman who ran and engaged with running clubs and would run marathons and charity runs and park runs before lockdown. And actually, he was one of the respondents that really expressed that fearfulness in terms of going out running on his own, using his local park for running on his own, but actually encountering other people who would either directly question or he would perceive to be questioning his place there and whether he should be there. And again, that sense of kind of crowding and being amongst other people as he was undertaking his runs in the local park. But again, interestingly, these connections with nature during lockdown, he found himself joining and creating a virtual running group. And actually, as part of that, he's becoming more adventurous and where he travels as he discovers new paths in and through his natural environment surrounding his home. And he wants to continue to do that after lockdown. So we're really seeing the potential for these changing longer term relationships with nature. But of course, that comes with a very clear kind of caveat that when other commitments open up, then of course we're going to see that challenge of reconciling the desire to continue to engage with nature or re-engage with nature in ways that have previously been experienced. For example, there was another individual who talked about doing a lot of conservation work, but actually because of conservation, she doesn't have public access to private transport, relies on public transport. She felt she's not been able to do that. So again, waiting until restrictions are eased, waiting to be able to go back into that environment. So again, there's so many complex relationships at play here. Next slide, please, Brigitte.
Hi, Caroline.
So next steps.
Is this your last slide?
It is, yeah,
Thank
just
you very much.
finishing off now. Thanks. So yeah, so where are we just now? As I said, it's very early days. We're coming towards the end of the interview period. We'll have that completed by the end of this month. And again, just looking really excited about delving into the analysis. So as Brigitte said, really happy to share more findings with you as they emerge. But yes, Pippa, that is the end of the presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much to Birgitte and Caroline. That was a fascinating presentation. And if I can just share one little insight, I can remember being about 17, so you're a young woman, and walking across what was a common, which I now know is to be a common, but at the time I just went, oh, it's an open space, I can walk here. Got to a sign that said country park, saw a whole load of cars going in and parking in the car park, BMWs, Mercedes and things like that, and thought, well, I can't go in there because I can't afford it. And so, and yet it's the very place I could go, and it was free to enter and there was no charge. I know that now, but at the time I felt completely excluded because everyone who was going in there obviously had a lot of money and I didn't. So there may be all sorts of barriers stopping people from going to the outdoors. I'll just ask, we don't have any questions in the chat. We have lots of observations. Oh, we've got one question. When will you be able to share the final findings?
Chris, hopefully soon. That's a very good question. We, as I say, we're completing the interviews by the end of this month with a view to undertaking the analysis or in the month or so after that. I am hoping around about certainly May time we'll be able to release some more further detailed indicative findings and interim findings, but the full reports will be available later in the summer, I believe, Brigitte.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we can certainly keep you posted as to when things are being released so that it can be shared amongst everybody.
That's great. We'll certainly include it in our e-zine, which we send out quite regularly. So if anybody's on the call and who wants to see the final things, just keep an eye out for your Outdoor Recreation Network e-zine and you'll get to see the final report. Great. Thanks very much. I'm going to move on now to the next session. Of some on-the-ground examples of inclusion and diversity good practice. We're joined with two speakers, Ruby Bedi Bapal from the Cars Seek Women's Walking Group. Ruby was trained as a volunteer champion by Scottish Forestry. The walking group is for women from the Sikh community who had expressed an interest in getting out walking together. Prior to lockdown restrictions, the group engaged with several Scottish forestry events in the woods, including International Peace Day celebrations and Diwali in the woods. Ruby has been leading walks in line with COVID-19 guidance. And we're also going to see a video from Catherine O'Brien, project manager from the Outward Bound Trust. The Outward Bound Trust are an educational charity that helps young people to defy limitations through learning and adventures in the wild. They challenge young people to never give up, to change their perspective and to learn the most important lesson, to believe in themselves. OBT identified a need to show young people the opportunities that exist for careers in the outdoors. They've sought to change this by connecting with pre-existing groups in the communities and providing opportunities for outdoor excursions and leadership training. We're going to see a couple of videos now, and at the end there'll be an opportunity to ask questions of both Ruby and Catherine.
Come together today because it's International Peace Day, and so we've got 6 community groups out in Castlemilk Woods, and we all enjoy each other's teas and coffees and snacks. We've got commonality brought together because we're all wanting to be out in the outdoors.
I think it's a great idea just to have so many different people from different countries and just taste their food and say hello to them, speak to them and make friends, make connections, and I think that's what the world needs, just on a small scale if everybody did that. I think it's wonderful.
We are very happy to meet a different, community with a different background, and we met a lot of different people and different tastes and different food.
It's interesting to meet people from other countries too, because we all live in this city. I can learn, things from them, and then we can also experience lifestyle stuff and like such as food, everything.
We are baking some Syrian Lebanese recipe, which is oregano, thyme, and sesame seed with olive oil mixture, all on dough. So the dough is being prepared beforehand, and we are baking it on the fire right now. Our aim always to empower women, to get them to integrate with others, especially with the new arrivals in Glasgow, get them introduced to different culture and show their culture as well, which is really good.
As part of a global community, celebrating it that it's happening all over the world, but also just to bring people together that might otherwise not meet. I think it's really important for any community. Folks really appreciate all the food and everything that's been organised for today, so it's great.
It's good to have different community group meeting like that, sharing food, having to discuss together, networking, and all this help the peace spirit around, in the society. And this is a good way also to make Scotland a great place.
So today's been a great day. We've had 6 different groups, we've had local communities, having a bit of a chance to just reflect, especially what's happening around the world, and we're really grateful for what we've got and basically what we've got around us, the great countryside environment and obviously the woodlands.
Happy Peace Day!
Hi, I'm Ruby from the Cause Walking Group, and I'd just like to say a few words how beneficial these sessions have been. We've thoroughly enjoyed them all, and you've opened up a whole new world. Although we're all professional women, we're all working women, none of us really had any knowledge of these woodland areas so close by to home. So, and also we're always a bit scared to really venture away into these areas. So I think you've really helped us a lot. We've enjoyed the session with Craig where we learned how to light a fire, how to use the Kelly kettle, we did some knitting, etc. And that was just the fact that we were outdoors and we all sat around the fire, toasted marshmallows and had some Indian chai that we made, and did some knitting, and we started singing songs. Some of them started singing old Punjabi folk songs, and that brought back memories of them being back in India, and they just thoroughly enjoyed the session. We are really most of us are from rural sort of backgrounds back in India, and we really are very outdoor people at heart. But I think being in this country, sometimes we're put off by the cold weather or really lack of knowledge as to where these areas can be accessed. And we just thoroughly enjoyed it, and so we are very, very grateful. They have provided us with a lot of healthy walking, fresh air, but as well as that, with a lot of mental kind of well-being, positive vibes, and really a lot of support from each other, as our sense of kinship, sisterhood. So we're really, really grateful, and hopefully you'll carry on with these sessions, and we'll definitely take part as long as they go on. Thank you so much.
Hi there, my name is Kate O'Brien from the Outbound Trust. I'm going to talk a bit about our programme developing young leaders from minority ethnic backgrounds within outdoor learning. We started this work about 3 years ago when we decided to take the first steps towards creating and retaining an instructional team which more closely represented the backgrounds of young people who we worked with. And this was so that we had a wider range of role models as leaders within the organisation. We started off with the research phase, so we looked at our own demographics. We looked out with our organisation to the wider outdoor sector, and we also looked outside of our sector to see if there was any nuggets of wisdom we could glean from there. In terms of our own demographics, at the beginning of our work here, we our staff team was predominantly male, white, middle class. So we were 80% male, 20% female instructional team, and we didn't employ anybody from a minority ethnic background in an instructional position. When we looked at the wider sector, we recognised that a lot of the core qualification pathways, be it degree courses or national governing body awards, or college courses, that weren't that diverse either. So, for example, only 18% of summer mountain leaders were female, and only 1% of summer mountain leaders from a minority ethnic background. So we decided if we wanted to make an impact and start to shift some of these things, we would need to do some initiatives which developed people who hadn't traditionally got involved in outdoor learning as a career, and do some targeted initiatives in order to try and shift that. So that's when we realised we needed to work in partnership, as we didn't have a huge amount of expertise, and although lots of young people from all different kinds of areas of the UK and culturally diverse areas of the UK would come to our centres and come on courses, we didn't necessarily have established connections or relationships in those areas. And so in our research phase, we identified some partners to work with to create outdoor leadership opportunities for young people from ethnic minority backgrounds over 12 months. So we worked with 2 partners on a pilot in 2019, Lindley Educational Trust and Shadwell Basin Outdoor Activity Centre in Manchester and London, kindly funded by the North Face, who provided both some finance to allow the project to take place, and also some kit, which was essential for the young people to get started. Since then, we've had subsequent funding from Sport England and from DEFRA's Green Challenge Recovery Fund to allow us to broaden out the programme and double the numbers for 2021. In terms of what we actually do on the programme, this gives a bit of an outline for the plans that we have for 2021, but also outlines what we have previously done. So I'll run through this briefly, and then there's going to be a short film shown at the end so you can get a bit of a flavour. There's also some stories from some of the young leaders themselves, and if you're interested to read more about that, there's an article that I believe is getting sent out which goes into more detail. So we started off with the community partners identifying participants, and those were participants who'd been engaged through community initiatives in the outdoors over a number of years, who perhaps didn't have the family support or background to sort of take them to the countryside or introduce them to these sorts of activities, but because of their involvement in youth or community groups, they'd become passionate about the hills or the rivers, or being on the water, or whatever it was, and they were young people who had an interest in developing their leadership skills further, whether that was as a career or whether that was on a voluntary basis, to come and give back to their community, or in a kind of summer holiday type sense. So the partners worked with those participants to kind of prepare them and engage them in leadership initiatives a couple of times a month before they came to Outward Bound on a leadership and employability skills course, where they were introduced to more leadership opportunities and in wilder environments, away from their everyday environment. In between the Outward Bound interventions, there was that continued community support with a mentor. So each time they came to Outward Bound, the programme continued back in the community with evening sessions or day sessions. So the next phase with Outward Bound was the young leaders came back as an ambassador with a school, and they were matched with a primary school from their local area, so they were able to work alongside one of our instructors to develop their own leadership skills, to get some feedback, and also to act as a role model for the younger students who were from their community. Some of the funding went to some of the young leaders doing a longer, more immersive Skills for Life award, multi-day residential with Outward Bound, and then the final phase was work experience. Unfortunately, some of the pilot was interrupted by COVID, but actually what resulted was really incredible. The young people remained engaged and involved, and actually ended up volunteering or being in paid employment with the community partners on summer and October programmes, which is fantastic. So they got a very real version of work experience. So this was the group that we worked with. We've got our 2 mentors there in purple, and they were essential to the programme's success. They were actually young women who previously themselves had come up through the youth programme in both of their contexts, and were now in their sort of mid-20s and had developed this real passion for the outdoors and a real passion for giving back to their communities and supporting other young people from similar backgrounds to themselves to develop in the way that they had. So that was a really key link for the programme, and something that has continued, which is fantastic. There's a few stories now from the group. It just shares, I suppose, a bit of their experience and a bit of what they see to be some of the challenges with people. For them getting involved in the outdoors. So I thought this was really fascinating. It's because people don't get involved in it enough, and it's also that people who are there already, they don't give you a very warm welcome, and it takes both to meet in the middle. And you know, I think throughout this journey, there's been lots of reasons put forward as to why people from minority ethnic backgrounds might not be so represented within the outdoors or are underserved in the outdoors. And this young person was kind of acknowledging that it's that two-way thing. You know, we need to get more involved, but actually the opportunity needs to be there and the welcome needs to be there. This young woman put it even more clearly that if you don't have people around you trying to encourage you and to do something that's not regarded as normal, then of course you're not going to do it. And that was, you know, kind of highlighting that for some of these young people, the family backgrounds that they came from, you know, either leisure wasn't a priority, the outdoors was seen as an uncomfortable or scary place, or it was just seen as something that's not for us. And if as a young person that's your experience and that's your background, actually it takes something outside of your family and your culture to encourage you to get involved. This was from one of the mentors, and again really highlighted the power of role models. So having someone from the same background, financial situation, culture, religion, encouraging you into this whole new world is where Rena found her passion for the outdoors. And she speaks so passionately about her personal experiences and her journey, and just the importance of having people like her to lead her forward. And that's really been a key part of this process, and fundamentally why we think this work is really important. So what's become really clear to us through developing this work is that change requires doing things differently, listening to different perspectives and collaborating in new ways. I think for me it's really all about relationships, and building relationships in ways that open up possibilities and open up opportunities for people. So I've got a wee film, it's just a few minutes long, and there's also an article to accompany the presentation. So if you're interested to find out more, then do get in touch following this, and I'm also happy to answer any questions. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.
My name is Tori Cooper, and I am Marketing and Communications Director for the Outward Bound Trust. Outward Bound is an educational charity that helps young people to defy their limitations through learning and adventure in the wild. The Outward Bound and the North Face wanted to come together to do something about diversity in the outdoor sector. Both Shadwell Basin and Linley Educational Trust have been doing great work in those communities to work with groups where there is less representation, and they have that excellent experience.
I'm Jordan, I'm 18, so I started going to Shadwell and doing some activities, and then I did my leadership programme, and then I got qualified, and then I started doing some bits with North Face and Outward Bound. So I did a leadership project with them, and now I'm becoming an ambassador with them and working with some more young people. I went on an expedition with Outward Bound for 5 days to the Lake District. During those 5 days we did an overnight expedition, which I found quite challenging, but the skills that I gained from this was learning the patience and how to bond and, you know, work with other people It was the best experience and I'll never forget it because I didn't think I could do it. I thought I needed loads of training. I thought I needed to be the fittest person. I thought I needed money, a lot of money to do those activities that I did. And with a lot of persistence and motivation, I ended up climbing it and it was the greatest feeling.
Hi, my name's Miriam, I'm 21. I've been at Shadwell for 9 years now and I've been working for 3. I've done some pretty amazing things at Shadwell. They've opened a world of opportunity. I've climbed some of the highest mountains in Britain. It's been really exciting. I've gone on some expeditions on my own. I went to Nepal, done some kayaking and mountain biking in Nepal. That was amazing. If this program continues, which I think it should, because it's definitely changed the young leaders' lives, and it definitely has changed mine. And I think it's amazing. And I think if we carry on, the outdoors will be a better place.
Welcome back. I think you probably felt that was as powerful as I did. So thanks very much to our 2 presenters there. They are both online and willing to take questions. So if you do have any questions, it would be good to hear them now. You can post them in the chat. I'm getting lots of things saying and amazing, fantastic, great. My thought was, can I have some of that dough? Because when people were cooking the food in the International Peace Day, I kind of thought, I'm so hungry. And I was only just looking at it. I was thinking, it's a long time since breakfast. So just before our break, does anybody have any questions that you'd like to put to our 2 speakers? They are both online. I have one. And somebody's just posted it on the chat, is how do you go about identifying people to take part? And I think that's really for Catherine, probably, but maybe for Ruby as well. Catherine, how do you go about identifying people to take part?
Hi there. Yeah, good question. So we really worked with our community partners quite closely on that to identify young people who'd had some outdoor engagement and had that real enthusiasm for the outdoors and really were wanting to take that next step into leadership. And the community partners did some sessions with a kind of group of young people and then selected 6 from that process. Sometimes they had like a sort of application process where the young people actually had to do a bit of an interview, if you like, and that was part of that broader employability skills as well. But to really identify those who were committed to the leadership elements, that was how it worked.
Great. And there's been some follow-up questions to that, is how do you identify community partners?
When I started in this role, I had a few months of researching. So the community partners we worked with were organisations that we'd come across who were already doing existing outdoor work in the communities. So we had a few organisations in mind, and then when we got funding, we were able to reach out to those organisations and invite them to be part of developing the programme with us. All
right, thanks. And I've been asked, how do you get funding? And how does funding last?
I guess we're really fortunate in that we do have a fundraising team. So we already had the North Face on board as a funder, and they'd actually funded some women's courses previously, and they were really interested in the broadening diversity element, as that was something they were keen to do within their own organisation as well. So it's really, I guess, through relationships with other corporate organisations who have the similar goals, and then collaboratively working out how we can kind of help support each other to create something really practical and real.
Yeah, that's great. Some people have asked where you could get funding from, but I do know that the National Lottery Heritage Fund at the moment have a strong emphasis on resilience and inclusion. Yeah. So if you have projects which are aimed at inclusion, I think they'd be more than willing to hear about them.
Yeah, for sure, and that's who's funding us at the moment as well. Yeah.
Oh, you've got lottery funding as well, have you?
Well, it's heritage lottery funding through DEFRA. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. Any questions for Ruby? I found Ruby's video to be really inspiring, and how she talked about how great it was to get out. I just wonder, Ruby, if you could say a few words about how you find members to join your group.
Yes, hi there. So we were an established walking group, and because there were ladies in the Sikh temple who were interested in walking regularly. So, but the walks were, you know, people were dropping in and out, and we felt there wasn't really a set core of people. But when the session started, and there was about 10 of us, and we really gelled together as a group then. And I think that's the important thing. We can go for walks and maybe just talk to one or two people, but when you go out on a day trip to outdoor woodlands, you get the chance to sit around the fire, for example, and talk to each other and really, you know, get to know each other. And it's in that outdoor environment that quite often people feel the pressures off. There's no family there, children, etc. Although we love our family to bits, but we often need to get away on our own. And just the fact that we were on our own, we could let off some, you know, steam and just talk about little worries. And it was really just great, and that was like the main thing. We just felt so healed emotionally. Yeah.
That's lovely to know. Yes, I can empathise with the get away from them. As much as you love them, a bit of time away is great, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. There's lots of stuff going on in the chat, and something about the Green Recovery Challenge Fund has opened up again, so there's some money on offer there. And so yes, lots of chat. We will record the chat, and that will be available later. I'm seeing people clapping and lots of hearts, so thank you so much to those two presenters. I think they did an excellent job. And were really, really inspiring. So thank you, Ruby. Thank you, Catherine. What I'd like to do is introduce the next session of on-the-ground examples of inclusion and good diversity, good practice. And first of all, I'd like to hand over to Elizabeth Rogers from Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland, who's going to introduce the first session. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Catherine. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so if people have got their microphones on or videos on, maybe just switch those off. Thank you. So for this session, I hope to just briefly bookend an interview that we have done to do with Darkley Forest Community Trail. And so I suppose the idea of this session is to provide a bit of a case study on green space for rural and deprived areas. So we're going to be looking at Darkley Forest. You probably haven't heard of Darkley Forest. So Darkley Forest just sits on the edge of the village of Darkley in County Armagh, and it's very close to the Irish border. Back in 2018, there was over 15 kilometres of multi-use trails opened in the forest. And really, this whole initiative was community driven. And it was the community groups that secured funding from the local council, from Sport and I, from DAERA. So it's really important, you know, as we frame this, to say this was a really community-driven initiative. It was very much bottom up. And really it was the local community who wanted to have trails around their nearby forests to help improve relationships in the area after a large incident during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And so the community runs, or did before COVID, they were running lots of events in the forest to bring people together. But in terms of thinking about the rural and the deprived setting of Darkley, it's to sort of frame it, it sits as sort of number 93 out of 890 on the NISRA income deprivation measure, meaning that it's kind of bordering on the top 10 most deprived areas, or top 10%, sorry, most deprived areas in Northern Ireland. So it is deprived, it is rural, and as we heard yesterday, you know, access to and the benefits of outdoor recreation, they're not enjoyed equally across income groups. In Northern Ireland, for example, and Duncan shared this yesterday, 50% of those living in the 10% most deprived areas visit the outdoors at least once a week. So that's only 50% of those from the 10% most deprived. And if you compare that to the least deprived areas, that figure rises up to 82%. So the frequency of visits to the outdoors decreases as deprivation levels increase. There's certainly a correlation there. And then the other thing to maybe just mention as I frame this interview is to talk about the rural-urban divide. And we looked at that a little bit yesterday as well. In Northern Ireland, only 56% of rural residents say that they have local paths and green space within easy walking distance. And this compares to 71% in mixed urban-rural areas and 73% in urban areas. So rural people do feel that they don't have the same access to off-road trails and green space. And that means that as a result, lots of people in rural areas are forced to walk on the small roads and lanes, or else they're forced to jump in their car and drive to nearby trails or green space. And obviously that poses lots of safety issues and also environmental issues as well. In Northern Ireland, we don't enjoy the access provision that came about in Scotland and England through the Land Reform Act and the Crow Act respectively. So that there is an issue there in terms of lack of access to green space. And so in Northern Ireland, we do have to work very hard with local communities, and we have to work hard with the landowning community to establish off-road trails. And so I'm just going to hand over now to my colleague Claire Saunders and to Willie Monaghan from Darkley Rural Community Group. Willie's a teacher, so he couldn't be with us this morning for this event, but he did catch up recently with Claire, and what they spoke about was how the forest was opened up and the impact that it made to the local community. So I'll just play this video now and then I'll come back to wrap up.
Hi Willie, thank you for joining me today. We're just trying to have a chat about Darkley and just find out a little bit more about the community and the forest and what the trails have meant for you. Can you tell me a little bit about Darkley, the village itself, and so that we know a little bit more about it?
Well, Darkley is a small village, about half a mile from the border with County Monaghan it's in County Armagh. And Darkley has always been seen as an area forgotten. I don't like the phrase I was coined, the forgotten village, but often it did seem like that. I mean, services would have been very, very poor, and it would have very high social deprivation. And there had been groups in the past who rose up from about 1986 and all the way through. That group sort of come to an end. There was a lull, if you like, of activity, and things then started falling back into disrepair. So long story, very long story, very short. We came on the scene about 2015, meeting, sort of networking, trying to find out who we need to chat to get a community group going again. And in January 2017, so there's a lot of groundwork there. So in January 2017, then we finally constituted as a community group. The council, ABC Council, are very, very much with us. We liaise very, very closely with them, and they would come every year to oversee our AGM. So I say we work very, very closely with them. But we basically work on tidying up the village. We do what we can. We lobby all those organisations with an interest in the village, for example, the council, housing executive, and so on. So basically, we're we work on behalf of the community to keep the area tidy, to try and develop it, try and regenerate it. And on top of that, we also run events. So it's not only how the village looks. We're not just into that sort of cosmetics. We're also into trying to build community as well.
And tell me a little bit about then, Willie, how the community group got involved with the development of the forest and trying to get the forest opened for the local area.
The first I really thought about was I met Outdoor Recreation. We're at a meeting in Darkley one time in October 2014, and we got a brief little bit about it, about the idea and what was being mooted at the time. And then we roll on to about 2017 when our group did constitute, and then I'm at Outdoor Recreation again. They had the plans to view in Darkley Primary School. And I went along then to say that I was a community representative and if there was anything that we could do to help. And at that stage, it seemed to be stuck. The plans were there, the proposals was there, but it was stuck in terms of who was going to use it, support from the community, and so on. And I guess our group come along at the right time for this project, because we were doing a survey at the time, and we did speak to Outdoor Recreation and we agreed to put a couple of questions about the forest into our survey. We were doing a survey for our own action plan.
Okay.
And basically we said, so then that information was passed to Outdoor Recreation and then they were able to then go to the funders and say, listen, here is a survey that has been done in which people have asked for trails and this and that. So it was a really solid piece of research for Outdoor Recreation. And then obviously then they were seeking the funding from whoever they were seeking the funding of. And I know that one of the groups was Sport NI.
Sport NI, Tripsy, I think, funded it. And I think, the survey that you guys done really helped, push the trail development along with the councils and stuff. So like it was great to get that support from the local community groups to build the trails.
Brilliant. And I mean that's what we were about, and that's what we are about. We are about trying our best to get into our area as much services and facilities as we can. So I mean it seemed to be stuck at that point. I remember doing helping with a survey for Outdoor Recreation NI, because we really built up a link and a relationship very, very quickly, because these things, there was funding available. Nobody knew how long for, so things sort of moved on very, very, very quickly. And I remember helping with a survey, and I remember we were targeting the groups of over 50s and females and those with disabilities. And I mean, we had to put all that information in. But I mean, we had tremendous support from so many clubs. But it was a community group that went out and sought the support of all those groups. And I think we ended up on 25 groups who all gave how many numbers they had in them, how many members they had, and how often they trained and how often they would use it. And I think that's really what really got it over the end line. Now, I mean, everything was there long before our group came into being, but we are very proud that we were able to have contribute to what was already a fantastic plan. But I mean, it was a fantastic plan that we really got behind, because it was so exciting, and to have this on our doorstep, we couldn't but help and get it over that, because I mean, it was just so important that we got this facility.
Well, no, that's great. And, obviously now the trails opened officially in, I think it was like the end of 2018 in October time. And they've been in for, a couple of years now. So can you tell us a little bit about the impact of the trails in the forest and what that has meant for local people and their sort of physical and mental well-being?
Well, first of all, if anybody knows Darkley, it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you could be driving along, you could be out for a Sunday drive, you're out in the middle of the hills around the Callan Valley, and you turn a corner and there's a village. And a lot of people have actually said that to me, this village just come out of nowhere. But the reason being, it was built in that location because of the water power, and then for housing the workers, it's not really on the road to anywhere. And I have often said to people, unless you have business to be in Darkley or relatives in Darkley, you may never be in Darkley. It's so rural. And in terms of a built up area, it's probably in the ABC area, it's the southernmost populated area in our council area in ABC. We're right on the border with County Monaghan. I mean, you look from Darkley over and you're looking into County Monaghan. So that's how close we are. We are so rural, the roads are so bad. If you were to go out and chance yourself on the roads walking or running, I could say you're taking your life in your hands. So really,
so a lot of people use the forest then instead of going on the roads and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a number, I mean, so many people who actually started exercising because the paths were put in. People who had never walked, older people who had stopped walking the roads had got too dangerous, especially tractors flying, cars flying here, there, and everywhere. They actually came out and started walking. I spoke to so many people who actually were quite open with me and said that they had a problem with their weight, but they couldn't get out to get it shifted, and they started using Darkley Forest, and they started walking, and then some of them just walked and lost weight, which is obviously good for their mental health and their physical health and their mental health, because I mean, you know how it is if you're struggling with weight. I mean, I've had that myself, and I mean, it does get you down. So I mean, losing the weight, becoming happier in themselves, in their body, and then mentally, the effect that has had on them is just phenomenal. But I mean, so many of them told me, you know, they lost weight. Some of them went on jogging and then went and running. And now I see them, names popping up left, right, and centre, doing 10Ks, runs in Armagh, park runs, but they still always come back to Darkley Forest. So it has been great in that regard. It has become very social.
Okay.
Especially in the current climate. But even before that, I mean, you're meeting people who you ordinarily wouldn't meet. And I know that I've been out there and met people from as far as, say, maybe Newtown, which is about 3 miles away, even further, Newry. I've met people there from Belfast who have had relations who've said, you must come down, and they've spent the day in Darkley. So I've met people from all over, from Monaghan as well. So yeah, so it's been really good. People getting out, getting fit, their mental health, getting out of the house.
Well, what has now, like obviously since COVID-19 has come in, what has the trails meant to the community since that change in the whole environment for everybody?
In a nutshell, it means we need a bigger car park, or possibly a massive extension, because I can tell you that although it was well used previously to COVID, during COVID, the forest has been a hive. Now, I know that would maybe you're talking about COVID and social distancing, and you're thinking maybe, you know, that sort of image of a hive being crowded. It's not, because you can go to Darkley Forest and the car park could be completely full and you might not meet one person. It's so well spread out that you might not. But more times than enough, you do meet some families. And if I told you how many times somebody has turned around and says, because I would take, there's me and the wife and 4 children, the times we've met other families, and it goes, oh, real people. Real people. They haven't been out of the house except in Darkley Forest, you know, because they've been good. They've been keeping home and adhering to the guidelines. And the only time they get out is to go to, like, I mean, that's massive impact. And I know then you would stand at a distance talking to people, people you maybe haven't seen in a long time. And one thing that always strikes me is they talk about the cabin fever and the frustrations, especially when they're maybe trying to work from home. And homeschooling, this remote learning and remote teaching going on. And I mean, I know all about it for them, and then I'm remote teaching as well. You know, your house can become very much a melting pot for a lot of negative feeling. Everybody crammed in and getting on each other's nerves. And rather than exploding, what people have been doing is getting in their car and going to Darkley Forest. And they have said it just makes all the difference. It really, really clears the head. Their blood pressure level comes way down. And they just love it. And I mean, it's everything. It's walking through the trees. It's meeting other people. It's the views of the lakes. It's down by the river. It's the old part of the forest. It's the wildlife. If you're lucky, you'll see there's a couple of families of red squirrels. There's a massive family of jays, the birds. There's tree creepers. So the wildlife that's in there is in abundance as well. It has so much, and it has so much potential. I mean, we can really do so much more. But what we have there at the moment is fantastic. But there's so much potential for more, yeah.
Well, listen, Willie, thank you so much for, chatting to me and sort of filling us in and telling us more about Darkley. It's been great to hear sort of from your perspective, what's been going on and how it's developed and how it's changed, and you know, how beneficial it's been for the local community. So thank you very much for your time today.
You're very welcome.
I do love that interview with Willie. You can really see his passion for his area and for Darkley Forest as well. And just before I hand back to Pippa, I just want to say just something about recent research that we've done on this community trail around Darkley Forest. So because of the rural deprived setting in which it sits, we decided to include Darkley Forest Community Trail as one of 3 pilot sites for developing an impact survey for all new trails that will be constructed going forward from outdoor recreation in Northern Ireland. So last month, we conducted a survey, and one of the things that we wanted to ascertain from that survey was what was the social return on investment. So last year for 2020, from January through to December, we know that the total visits to Darkley Forest Community Trail was over 20,000. And from the survey, and this is quite interesting, I think, from the survey, the average visit per year per user is 60, which I think shows that there's a very high local usage, that there could be an estimated annual visitor rate of 344. So it seems to be that it's the local people that are using this local green space, and that's really the aim of a community trail, is for it to be an asset for the local community. So just in terms of what we found out from the survey, 87% said that they received physical activity benefits from going to the forest. Interestingly, 16% met CMO guidelines on achieving physical activity targets. So they were going there, they were being active for at least 150 minutes at moderate intensity. And then in terms of mental health and well-being, you can really see here the benefits. So 87% saying that they felt mental health and well-being benefits, and that was done through subjective well-being measurements. I think 2/3 of people said that the forest made them feel closer to home, and just under half said that they experienced learning benefits in relation to learning about nature and about the local heritage. So whenever we multiplied the financial proxies together, the figure that we got in terms of the annual social return on investment, we got 93,611. So in terms of how this sort of scales up over the years, so after 5 years, the social value generated is £1 spent, £2 returned for the local community. After 10 years, this then rises to £4. And I think it's interesting, and it's important to say that the typical lifespan of a trail, if it's well constructed, is probably around 25 years. And so if we look at that time frame, we know that we can estimate that the total social value generated for this particular trail, for this community, will be £2,340,275, which means that for every £1 it took to build those trails around Darkley Forest, the local community will get back £10 across physical health, well-being, environment and learning benefits. So before I hand back to Pippa, I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope that this conversation that you heard between Claire and Willie, and also just these figures around social return on investment, just shows the value that green space and local trails has in rural and deprived areas. Pippa, I'll pass back to you.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and I love that figure at the end. A social return on investment of 10 to 1. There aren't many projects in the public sector that give you such a fantastic return, and I think it would be good to share those findings in detail so that people can take those away. And I do love the fact that it's sort of, you put in some good paths and people use them, and I think that's great. It doesn't always work, but yes, it's a great case study. So thanks very much for that, Elizabeth. And thanks very much to Claire and Willie as well. Right, I'm going to move on to the next 2 videos. We've got 2 videos, one's on inclusive cycling and one's on Forest for Everyone. Inclusive cycling, we've got Dr. Emily Ryder, who's Programme Manager for Cycling UK. She'll introduce you to the Edinburgh All Ability Bike Centre, a project that challenges beliefs about who is able to cycle. It's grown from 1 site to 2 sites and has incorporated all ability health walks. The video includes testimonials from those who have benefited directly from the programme. I'm particularly looking forward to this one because I've visited an all ability cycle thing in Hampshire, and it was just inspirational. Our second video is from Jo Walton, Digital Content Manager, Forestry England, because with the importance of online communications, we really need to look at our digital content. And Jo's going to introduce the digital approach of Forestry England to promote diversity and inclusion. In an era of online trolling and hate speech, Jo explains how the Forestry England seeks to be real and bold, promoting authentic stories, supporting meaningful change and actions, avoiding cherry picking or being tokenistic. And then we'll move on to our breakout sessions, but don't panic. I'll introduce how that you get into the breakout sessions after these videos. Thanks very much.
At the Edinburgh All Ability Bike Centre, the ABC, we believe that cycling is for everybody and every body. The ABC is a project that challenges beliefs about who is able to cycle and empowers people to live the active and independent life they want to, as included members of the local community. We have a great selection of adapted bikes and a fantastic team of staff and volunteers. This combination allows us to support people with a range of physical disabilities, health conditions, and additional support needs. We work with wheelchair users, older people, people with learning and communication difficulties, autism spectrum conditions, visually impaired people, and just about everyone else in between. The ABC has been running since 2015, when it started out at 1 site in the north of Edinburgh with 1 part-time member of staff. We now have 4 team members across 2 sites, and we've begun to incorporate all ability health walks into our offer as well. We work closely with a number of local partners, and we strive to continue to build on what we have. Ultimately, we would love to see a network of ABCs across Scotland. The project has been funded in a variety of ways since its inception. We rely on grants from trust funds, such as RS MacDonald, and we have received some funding from the Scottish Government as well. We're also very lucky to have received some very generous cash donations in our time, and these have allowed us to purchase many of our bikes and other equipment that we have. The coronavirus crisis has disproportionately impacted the disabled community, and it's the responsibility of all of us here to do what we can to support disabled people to access the outdoors and to experience physical activity. This film really demonstrates the very real joy that our participants feel when they cycle with us. I hope it makes you smile and gives you food for thought.
So we'll use a range of adaptive bikes to help people get going, and that includes people with neurological conditions, learning disabilities, physical disabilities, age-related conditions, acquired conditions such as strokes or MS and things like that. So I'm David Glover, I'm the Senior Development Officer for the Edinburgh All Ability Bike Centre. Cycling is beneficial to the people who come and use our bikes as it is for anyone else. You've got the health benefits, the physical health benefits for getting out, getting active, fresh air, exercise, the mental health benefits and social benefits, getting to meet new people, and just the feeling they get when they're riding with other people and being part of the public.
Right, the exercise and the fun bit, and we're doing it, and we've been doing it so long now, and it's a very good thing to do. I've been on bike for a long time, and I kind of know what to do, but sometimes I get myself into a muddle, and like Dave can fit me and get me out of tight corner.
I like cycling because it's actually very good and good exercise. Here we go! Rock and roll! I feel you get your legs and the muscles start cycling, and it feels good and get ready. Oh God, it's a tight corner. I can go fast and keep it up. My bike's a motorbike. Rim, rim, rim. Oh, it's a beautiful morning. I like it.
There's 2 or 3 service users that have been using the service ABC
since the start, and when they first joined they were really almost reluctant to get on the bicycle, whereas now it's something they look forward to each week, and when it gets to Friday you can see them changing physically and just looking forward to coming out, and when we get here they're the first ones on the bike and they're the most reluctant ones to actually leave. We're coming!
They're catching us, let's go! Donna's amazing, she's came on so far. She's so much fitter than she used to be. She's the first one on the bike and she loves to race, she loves going for it with everybody. Although she's non-verbal, she can sign and she'll give you thumbs up, nodding for yes, signing yes. She's always having a great time. You're good now, aren't you? Super fit. Anyone can take part regardless of their needs or disabilities.
There's a wide range of people that benefit from hand cycling. Obviously, disabled people, particularly people with lower limb impairments, paralysis, arthritis, amputees, chronic pain. But equally, it's quite beneficial for able-bodied people as well. It's good for upper body fitness, but it's also good for changing your perspectives and how you see life and how you see people. Because when you see somebody in a wheelchair actually hop on a bike and go for a ride and keeping up with people riding with their legs, it's just absolutely phenomenal.
When I'm cycling, especially on this type of bike, it gives me all the back support I need, almost like a massage as I'm cycling to my muscles, and it gives me the cardio because I'm trying very hard, especially on hills, and it gives me fresh air, and it's a social thing to do. I have looked after my grandsons as grannies do, and I think they quite enjoy beating me on the track because I'm so slow compared to them.
Oh, I am Toby and I am Granny's favourite grandchild. I like to think Granny likes to come here. We have a route that we usually go on. I mean, I usually stay inside and play games all day. And I just get paler and gradually paler. But I guess this stops that entirely and makes it look like less of a vampire than I feel like.
My name is Alistair Milligan and I like to cycle. At first we always did a side by side, but eventually I got more confident and did a tricycle alone. And eventually that got me to where I am today. It's really great. I feel like I've improved a lot and that's satisfying. My dad's become a better cyclist in the process as well, and it's really good for my gran as well, as both of them, they can't really run as much as they used to. So cycling is a great way for them to get exercise, and it's good for me as well.
Both the boys are on the spectrum with Asperger's. Both present in totally different ways. Both have their challenges. Very clever boys, but they love life and they love coming here.
For me, it's probably the best form of exercise because it's out in the air. I can just pace myself, faster, slower. It's perfectly safe and I feel secure. I think what I have is hemiparesis. This was a birth injury. There was some sort of complication that resulted in lack of oxygen. I was a forceps delivery and the forceps must have pressed too hard on the right hand side. I came out with the right hand side not completely functional. David and his colleagues have been very helpful because there's only one position of this bike and the pad pedals which work for me. There's a sweet spot that allows me to exercise enjoyably. It cheers me up immensely because it's one way that I can control my environment, and it's actually a complete body workout I'm beginning to discover.
Everyone needs this opportunity to get cycling. We love cycling, I love cycling, always have done, and I want everyone to have that opportunity to enjoy it as well.
Hi folks, I'm Joe Walton, the Digital Content Manager at Forestry England, and today I'd like to introduce our approach to diversity and inclusion on our digital channels. Now, our corporate strategy, and don't fall asleep at those two words because our corporate strategy is interesting, is to connect everyone with the nation's forests. So regardless of background, race, mobility, preference, income, lifestyle, everyone. And I'd say in part, we do this. So we actually drive more than 230 million visits and are the largest single provider of countryside leisure visits in England. And in fact, we look after, I think it's 1,500 forests and woods across the country. So that means that almost everyone, 99% of people live within an hour's drive of our forests. But unfortunately, we, and indeed across much of the outdoor industry, have low diversity among visitors, particularly low numbers of visits from people of colour. This is a problem, and sometimes it manifests and we receive hate speech and abuse on our social media channel from ignorant and angry members of the outdoor community in response to posts promoting diversity and inclusion, or even representing. In other cases, this is less overt, so in the numbers that show our industry actually has far fewer visitors from marginalised groups. It can also manifest in a less diverse staff in our industry too. So if we're really about connecting everyone with the nation's forest, then we have a lot to do. Now in Forestry England, we are working hard to do some of this, to improve our policies, our representation, and to do a better job of making sure that all people feel welcome in the forest through our communications. And I won't be digging into all the programmes, groups and initiatives which are set up within Forestry England, although we will talk proudly about those as we make positive strides. But instead today, I'm going to share our tone of voice principles, which we've developed for both internal and external channels so that we can more confidently communicate, knowing that we're keeping diversity and inclusivity at the forefront of all of our communication. So I'll just go into a little bit of the background of how we develop these and then dig into each of those just for a bit of context. So to create these, we actually assessed our and other communications in and around topics of diversity and inclusion, and indeed looked at how people responded. We looked at what worked and what didn't, and we analysed why. And then we combined what we'd learned with our brand values. That's what helped us develop this really clear wheel, our voice. And now these principles are not something that we use in isolation. These principles have been backed by our senior leadership right across Forestry England. And as such, we're using them for new content, any new content we develop for any of our business areas. Now, let's start with We Are Real. So this is one of the most major areas we're talking about here. And it's about us saying, we will do the work first and then tell the story. We'll do the work first and then tell the story. This avoids us cherry picking things and acting in a tokenistic manner. And for us, this means that when we're developing content, we check that there's substance to what we're saying and tell the real story, not just saying something in order to be perceived in a certain light. So, for example, we look to celebrate pluralism and difference through engagement with diverse awareness days, but contribute only when we have something real to say that we're doing. And our audience, we know our audience will be able to tell a tokenistic gesture from an authentic action of support. And I think this is something we've fallen short on in the past, making maybe sweeping inclusivity statements rather than showcasing projects or waiting to tell a story of what we're doing. We're also committed to being supportive. Now, we acknowledge that we're not an authority on representation or inclusivity, nor is our own voice always the best one to communicate with. So instead, we want to share our platform to empower groups who are underrepresented. For example, we know that there's a global issue of certain communities feeling unsafe or not welcome in the outdoor and natural environment. So to combat this, we want to invite members of those communities who do visit the outdoors to communicate on our platforms and theirs, to speak directly to people who we typically don't reach. We will listen and engage with the people who are making green spaces more welcoming to those marginalised groups and share their stories. We also have a really strong social media policy. Now you might be saying, what's the relevance of a social media policy? Well, what this does is it empowers our staff to stop our channels from becoming a platform for hate speech. Whilst criticism of our work is never removed or taken down, all abuse is, and it's swiftly removed and documented. And we leave an explanation of why pinned to the content for others to see. Now this stops us from engaging with trolls and sort of feeding the engagement around abuse and negativity, but it allows us to actively be against hate. Our values are actively against hate, and our strong social media policy supports staff in acting to safeguard our followers. We're also bold, and now what we mean by being bold is that we will not just follow the trends that other organisations are doing. We know that slapping a rainbow flag on our logo is not enough. It is a tokenistic gesture. Now, we have some really creative people in my team. I'm super thankful and amazed by the creativity of the people that I work with every day. And they're capable of telling some fantastic stories. And if the tone is right, we can show to the public our commitment to the values that we stand for. Yes, we are a brand, but we're made up of people who believe in these values and whose stories we want to tell. And because we believe in standing up for these values, we're prepared to take risks with ambitious stories and cement who we are in the eyes of the public. We will often share humanizing stories, so our staff or our history, and for example, other stories where we host upcoming Pride events, parades and festivals. We will tell everyone about this as much as we can, and we're proud of the amazing women who are making inroads in, let's face it, a male-dominated industry. We will share our pride vocally. We're also positive. Now, when talking about discrimination against minority groups, there is a growing tendency to become negative and newsy, only talking about problems. Now, we instead, rather than focusing on the negative, we commit to telling positive stories, things that we can celebrate and will balance the negative with the positive. Well, this will allow us to sort of constructively avoid associating conversation around minority groups with negativity. We know that tough reads can trigger grief or worse, it can actually switch people off so they stop paying attention. So we're committed to always finishing with a positive to capture people's attentions and interest with otherwise hard issues. Now, finally, my last principle I want to talk through is we are welcoming. And I know that this one is something that sort of sings through all the others, but it's about making everyone essentially feel welcome in our forests. And we actually recognise that a really effective way to do this is by making people feel valued and heard, a dialogue. We also know that sort of this is a great way to spark a connection and build a connection with our brand. So it's beneficial business sense. So for example, our weekly check-ins on Instagram, they've been getting vast amount of engagement. So thousands and thousands of people engage every week, and it engages people in a conversation around often the benefits of forests for mental health. But we do this without preaching. We instead have been adopting a voice that says, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Tell us. Using this, we're able to be more engaging and to challenge people on difficult topics, making them feel valued and heard, making them feel welcome. We also have a commitment here to avoid labels. So I know that the way that people identify can be complex, and talking about diversity can be hard. So we instead strive to treat people as people rather than as their stereotype. This is tricky. We know that it's tricky to talk about diversity and inclusion, but it's important. So we're also developing glossaries and do-don't guides for staff who manage digital channels to aid this. You might be saying, what good is a glossary or a do-don't guide? But what this does is it sort of pulls down some of the barriers to talking about race, to talking about sexuality, gender, disability, religion, as we can be confident that we're informed. We can be confident that we're inclusive and welcoming in the way that we communicate. Thank you for listening to me talk through those. Now, I just want to say that that's it for our principles, but this is just our digital. So any real progress towards making forests more welcoming and inclusive to diverse people happens first, and then we tell that story. The progression here is not being driven by marketing. But using these principles that we've developed and committed to, we promise to tell the stories of what we're doing as we continue in our mission to connect other people and everyone with the nation's forests. Now, if you'd like to talk any of this through, please do drop me an email, joe.walton@forestryengland.uk. Like I said earlier on, this is sort of our approach, and it will be different for each organisation, but I'd be happy to share sort of a bit more about how we develop this, and if it's useful to anyone if they wish to go through a similar process themselves. Thanks for listening.
That was great. I must admit, I really enjoyed those last two presentations. really made me feel inspired, seeing all those different people on bikes, and then hearing Joe and all about his policy. I see it's been posted in the chat, so if anybody wants to lift it, then by all means it's available for you to see. And unfortunately we don't have Joe on the call today because he's moving house, but we do have Josephine Lavelle, I believe, from Forestry England. Are you there, Josephine? If you can take yourself off mute. Yes, technology is working. That's brilliant. We had a couple of questions which I thought we'd come to straight away, and then we'll move to the breakout rooms. But somebody did ask, what do you categorize as abuse? How do you do that?
It's when you see it, it's very obvious. Unfortunately, I think it tends to be repeated, and it tends to be on specific, directed in specific ways in specific posts. So it's often around race, unfortunately, and it's very, very clear that it is something that is inappropriate and not something that you would tolerate. There's no sort of exact rule on what is abuse, but it's very clear when you see it. It's what you and I would consider inappropriate. So I think it's a difficult question, that one, but it is very obvious when you see it.
That's useful to know. And just one other question, and then we'll move on to the breakout rooms. Somebody's asked, what about making sure digital content itself is accessible, like having subtitles on all videos and image descriptions in the caption? Do you do that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of our core work. I think all organisations should adhere to the basic guidelines that you can get. I think the BBC do it very well, and I think you can use them as I know in the past when we were developing our website, we used them as an exemplar of how to make sure that everything we do is accessible to everyone from the start, from when you're building a website.
Thanks very much, Josephine. Thanks very much for being available to take some questions. Right, hopefully there was a reason for having competition. That was to give the chairs a little bit of time to just put all their thoughts together. And well done to the people who won. So I think the first group we're going to come to is the low income group. I believe that was Bridget. Was that Bridget?
Yes, that's me.
Okay. Bridget, if you could sum up what your group came up with.
Yeah, we had a fascinating conversation, and I'm not going to be able to capture all of it for you, but as you all know, that they were recorded. So in terms of the challenges and the barriers, they were quite common throughout the conversation. So we had public transport. We had that whole communicating and welcoming people to outdoor recreation facilities, and really there was a clear link made between the infrastructure and how welcoming that is, and how well that's communicated afterwards. So we had a really good example from Rachel May, and she was saying that she's organising first-time hiking experiences for groups, and there were key things about sort of taking the bus with the group, so that if they wanted to do it again, they knew which bus to get and where to get off, and then what to expect when they got there. So there was quite a lot around sort of reflecting on Pammy's conversation from yesterday, which is, don't expect groups to come to you, make sure you're going to them. And certainly a lack of time, it was a very clear thread as well for people of low income. Households not engaging with some of the established ways of talking to groups because of a lack of time. And if the group happened to have a person with a paid job attached to it, then you got engagement. But actually, if if that kind of facilitator wasn't there and being paid to do it, then it was much more difficult. We also had a really interesting conversation about people not having the right clothing and how that is perceived as a barrier. And we had some good examples of clothing donations, of actually making sure that if you're leading a group or you're meeting a group, that you're probably wearing the same as they are, so that you experience the challenges as they experience them as well. And lastly, there was a really good point at the end about looking outwards from our known groups and our easy wins. So I was reflecting that as an organisation, we know over the next few months we're going to be inundated with a lot of visitors, a lot of new visitors to our locations, and they are the quick and easy wins for us. So actually having the time and the space and the energy to go out to find groups that are going to be more difficult to talk to bring them into our locations is something that we're going to have to focus on, not right at the start of the easing of lockdown, but a little bit later on. And we shouldn't lose sight of that, and we should talk to our partners and our teams within our organisations to make sure that that is not lost over the coming few months. So that's it for me, Pippa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. It's interesting, and you'll see the parallels when we get to the children's group later. BAME groups. Kevin, was that you? I do believe it was you, Kevin. Would you like to come in and take yourself off mute? Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Pippa. And I think in terms of the discussion we had a very lively discussion and very informative. And I think we started by talking about the terminology, and that BAME is probably not the right terminology anymore, that we should just be focusing on minority ethnic. So, and obviously that there's such a plethora of different groups and communities that there is no one shoe or one size fits all. So we have to be sensitive to the different needs and the different cultures of the various communities and individual groups. So just as being mindful of that, I think is really important. Now, we built on this by saying that minority ethnic people have to be more visible in the sector, and people have to see minority ethnic communities in the outdoors more often. This is about this becoming the norm and becoming the usual. So I think there's a challenge for all of us there in terms of looking around our own organisations and seeing, are we actually doing enough ourselves? Are we engaging minority ethnic people in terms of our colleagues or workforce? And when we actually deliver services, are we engaging ethnic minority communities and groups? Now that goes back to practical things like how we can do recruitment and selection. It also goes back to actually how many leaders are out there in the outdoors. So rather than being always a white face, that actually the outdoor leaders represent the communities and the groups, and that would provide that confidence. And I think in terms of being also sensitive about the type of information we provide and being flexible in the imagery. A couple of key points at the end were really about how food connects people in the outdoors, and that this is really one of the fantastic and fun ways to overcome cultural barriers, and some of the experienced leaders sharing that and saying that's an opportunity. And then finally, I think the lack of dedicated funding, and this is long-term sustained funding in the sector to address these underrepresented groups. And I think the other thing that came out from this was really being practical about volunteers. If we're trying to engage volunteers, are we paying volunteer expenses and reimbursing travel and providing lunch? So these are real barriers for groups. And if you're not constituted or you don't have an official organisation, how do we still engage these groups and not put up barriers because we have a set way of doing things? So really, we've got to be flexible, and we've got to recognise we have to reach out and go to the groups and the communities and no longer sit back and expect communities and groups to come to us. So facilitated access, how can we do more of it and how can we do it better? So they were the main highlights, Pippa.
Thank you very much. I can hear some themes developing. Thanks very much, Kevin. Inclusion for disabled and low mobility groups. I must admit, I can't remember who was. Oh, Chris, it was you.
It was Pippa, indeed. Thanks very much. Yeah, we also had a fantastic conversation, fascinating conversation. I took a lot from it personally. I think in all these things, you sometimes make assumptions that you don't even know that you're making, and I think I'm honest enough to say I learned a little bit about that today. So with some great chat to focus on the actions and steps, and I'll provide some rationale around those. The key piece I took away and the group took away was it's for disabled and low mobility groups, it's about delivering on the desire for challenge, and that whilst all ability trails, etc., and that approach is very much welcomed, those with a disability and low mobility want more. They want to be able to engage with nature in the countryside in the same way those without a disability do. So that was a key takeaway from me. So some of that involves infrastructure, but a lot of it actually involves the equipment, particularly for wheelchair users, and the challenges around cost of that equipment. So that desire for challenge, rather than just focusing on the all ability approach, was a key piece for me. And in that as well, it's not assuming that those challenges are about physical disability, that there's a whole range of disabilities, obviously, so that it's looked at in its holistic approach. Therefore, a key takeaway was very much about co-design and a co-design approach with those who are going to deliver the piece that's being designed, the trail, the space that's being designed, and those who are going to use it. So that was really key. And to build on that, then it was looking at the case studies, for example, from this conference were really welcomed. But we need to do more there and demonstrate good case studies that have gone before, and really bring forward an A to Z guidance on how to provide quality experiences for those with a disability or low mobility. And within that, it's not just infrastructure. A key piece came out around information as well. So particularly those with a disability, they need probably a lot more information to make an informed choice, and they've a wider range of things to consider before they take a trip into the outdoors. So it's really important the information covers the nuts and bolts of that, but it also doesn't forget to inspire and motivate as well. And I think sometimes we're all a bit guilty of just focusing on the nuts and bolts. So that was a key piece for me. In terms of partnerships and stakeholders, there's definitely, from land managers, outdoor recreation developers, there's definitely a nervousness about how to engage and who to engage with. And there's a recognition that there are loads of groups doing things at a local, regional, national level. For example, a lot of the English delegates commented, we didn't know any of that was going on in Scotland, you know. So there's definitely a job of work for somebody or an organisation to do, to pull together who these good people are, who's doing the good work, and pulling that all into one place. And lots of good ideas shared in our chat, and lots of links for me to follow up on there. So that's everything from me. Thanks.
That's brilliant, and really interesting that people have found sort of so much inspiration from the case studies they've seen today. And so, yeah, thanks very much for that, Chris. And then tackling negative responses to inclusion and diversity. Lee, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pippa. Much the same as all the other groups, great conversations and discussions around these kind of topic areas. It's really interesting to see the same kind of solutions being put forward as well in terms of those themes. And it's no different from the group that we were looking at. In terms of those tackling negative responses to inclusion and diversity, a couple of the big things that came up was around fear. The fear of not knowing how to respond or pretending that they haven't seen anything. So there's something around that in terms of using public platforms and people not wanting to kind of